My name is Nora Delaney, and I'm 34 years old, and last Christmas, my family made sure I remembered exactly where I stood in their world. It started with the invitation. It came printed on heavy ivory paper, embossed with gold lettering and sealed with my mother's initials, F.D., for Fiona Delaney. Even her invitations carried the weight of judgment. The words were polite, the tone detached. Christmas Eve dinner at the Delaney estate, family only, family only. Those two words stung more than they should have. I hadn't been part of that circle for years, not since my father died. But I still read the line 3 times before folding it away. For a week, I told myself I wouldn't go. Every year I ignored the invitation, and every year I felt the same dull ache on Christmas Eve, the sound of laughter echoing in my memory, the clink of glasses I no longer shared. But this time felt different. Maybe I was tired of pretending their cruelty didn't still have power over me. Maybe I wanted to see how cold their love had really become. So I went. It was snowing when I drove up the long, curved driveway to the Delaney estate. The house glowed with the kind of golden light that looks warm from the outside but freezes you once you step in. The windows shimmered with garland and white lights. I parked near the servants' entrance old habit and sat there for a moment, watching the snow settle on the windshield. When I finally walked to the front door, I could hear faint music, laughter, the muffled rhythm of a life I no longer belonged to. Fiona opened the door herself, dressed in deep green velvet, her smile as polished as the brass handle she held. "Nora," she said, her voice clipped. "You came. You invited me," I said. Her smile didn't falter. "Of course. It's Christmas." The warmth inside the house didn't reach me. The grand hallway was filled with decorations, towering pine tree, crystal ornaments, the smell of cinnamon and pine. Everything perfect, everything expensive. My brother, Evan, stood near the fireplace, glass of wine in hand, laughing with my sister Mila and a group of their friends. When they saw me, their smiles thinned. "Well," Evan said, raising his glass. "Look who finally decided to come home, the prodigal daughter." I gave a small nod. "Merry Christmas, Evan." Mila hugged me briefly, the kind of embrace that's more performance than affection. "You look good," she said, her tone suggesting surprise. "Still teaching at that little school?" "Yes." "How quaint," she murmured, already turning back to her phone. Fiona motioned toward the dining room. "Dinner's about to begin. I took the liberty of setting a place for you." Her tone was kind, but her eyes weren't. The dining room gleamed under a chandelier that dripped with glass. The table stretched nearly the length of the room, set with silver and crystal, every seat filled except one, the chair at the far end, beside the heavy wooden door that led outside to the snowy patio. "That's your place," Fiona said lightly. "It's closest to the kitchen. Convenient, don't you think?" I looked at the chair. A draft came through the cracks near the frame. My seat was beside the door, the literal edge of the family. Evan smirked. "You always liked fresh air, didn't you, Nora?" Laughter followed. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, my face neutral. I'd learned long ago that silence disarms the cruel more than anger ever could. Dinner was loud, the kind of loud that tries to sound joyful but hides tension underneath. Fiona held court at the head of the table, her voice crisp and commanding. She spoke about investments, about social circles, about the success of her children. My name never came up. When I tried to speak, the conversation moved on without me. When I offered to pour more wine, Mila waved me off. "The help can handle it." No one noticed how still I sat, how I watched them, how I let their words settle into me like frost. Halfway through dinner, Fiona lifted her glass. "To family," she said. Everyone echoed her, crystal clinking. I raised my glass too, but I didn't drink. As dessert was served, a gust of cold air slipped through the door beside me. The candles flickered. Fiona frowned. "Close that, Nora. You're letting in a chill." I turned to latch it, catching my reflection in the glass, pale, quiet, almost invisible. For a moment, I saw what they saw, the daughter who never belonged. Then I smiled. A small, sharp thing. I realized I wasn't cold at all. They thought sitting me by the door was an insult. But my father once told me that doors don't just close, they open. And I still had his key on my necklace, the one he gave me the winter before he died. I turned back to the table, watching my family laugh and talk about vacations and money, the world they'd built without me. I memorized their faces, their tones, their careless words. Because this time I wasn't here to fit in. This time I was here to see. When dinner ended, Fiona stood, her voice bright. Well, Nora, I'm glad you joined us. It's nice when everyone makes the effort. Of course, I said. I wouldn't have missed it. She smiled, satisfied, already turning away. I looked once more at the door beside me, its brass handle catching the candlelight. I reached out, brushed it with my fingers. That night, sitting by the door, I decided to show them exactly where it led. The morning after that dinner, I woke in the guest room my mother had chosen for me, the smallest one at the far end of the corridor. The air was cold, the kind of cold that slips into your bones before you realize it. A single wreath hung on the door, and the wallpaper had started to peel. The room smelled faintly of lavender and neglect. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, thinking of all the Christmas mornings I used to wake up to the sound of my father humming downstairs. Back then, the house had felt alive. There were no gold ribbons or crystal centerpieces, just a tree filled with mismatched ornaments and paper snowflakes we'd made together. He'd always call up the stairs. The sooner you wake, the sooner the cocoa gets cold. It was his voice I missed the most. After his death, everything changed. Fiona stopped humming, stopped cooking, stopped smiling unless someone important was watching. She began hosting lavish parties, her grief hidden behind pearls and perfection. Evan followed her lead, slipping easily into his role as the golden child. Mila became the mirror image of their mother, graceful, polished, empty. And me? I became the ghost in my own family's story. When I walked downstairs that morning, the scent of coffee mixed with pine. Fiona was already in the kitchen, giving orders to the housekeeper. She didn't notice me at first, or pretended not to. Morning, I said. She glanced over her shoulder. You're up early. There's toast on the counter. I nodded, took a piece, and sat at the table near the window. Outside, snow still covered the fields, untouched and quiet. I could see the faint outline of my father's old greenhouse by the woods, half collapsed now, but once his favorite place. Fiona followed my gaze. I should have that torn down, she said. It's such an eyesore. He built it. I reminded her. She shrugged. People outgrow things. Her words settled heavy in the air. A moment later, Lydia Cross walked in, my mother's oldest friend and, in many ways, her opposite. Lydia was soft-spoken but sharp-minded, the kind of woman who noticed everything but rarely said it aloud. She'd been my father's confidant too, though I never knew how close they'd been. When she saw me, she smiled kindly. Nora, it's been too long. You look well. Thank you, I said. Fiona's tone turned brittle. Lydia insisted on joining us again this year. She can't stand being alone for the holidays. Lydia gave her a measured look. It's good to have company, Fiona, especially family. The way she said it made Fiona's shoulders stiffen. As the morning went on, Evan and Mila drifted in, laughing about something from the night before. Mila was already dressed like a magazine ad, her hair perfect, her perfume faintly sweet. Evan scrolled through his phone, barely looking up. Fiona began planning the evening party, her Christmas tradition, though it had little to do with family. She went over catering lists and guest arrivals, instructing everyone on how to behave. Nora, she said, try not to talk too much about your work tonight. The guests aren't really interested in education. I didn't plan to, I replied. Her eyes flicked up briefly, assessing me. Good. Just smile when spoken to. I wanted to laugh. She spoke to me the way people talk to waiters or strangers on the street, polite, practiced, dismissive. Lydia caught my eye from across the table. Her expression softened with sympathy. Later that afternoon, I helped arrange decorations in the hall, trying to busy my hands so I wouldn't say something I couldn't take back. Lydia joined me, untangling a strand of lights. Your father used to hang these himself, she said quietly. He hated how the staff did it, said it looked too perfect. I smiled faintly. He liked flaws, said they made things feel real. She nodded. He'd be disappointed, seeing how far from real this house has become. Her words held weight, the kind that lingers. When the party began that evening, the estate filled with polished strangers. Fiona floated through the crowd like a queen, every gesture rehearsed. Mila trailed beside her, the perfect reflection. Evan bragged about business deals I doubted he'd actually made. I stayed near the edge of the room, invisible again. Henry Cole arrived halfway through, tall, quiet, still carrying the same calm he'd had when we were younger. He used to visit my father's greenhouse, helping with repairs. Seeing him again after so many years felt like breathing air I'd forgotten existed. When he saw me, he smiled. "Nora Delaney, it's been too long." "Henry," I said, surprised by the warmth in my own voice. "You're working with my mother now?" "Temporarily," he said. "Handling some legal transitions for the estate. Mostly paperwork." Fiona noticed us talking and joined in, her tone falsely sweet. "Henry dear, I hope you're not boring Nora with business." He smiled politely. "We were just reminiscing, Mrs. Delaney." Lydia approached, her gaze steady on Fiona. "You might want to hear what he's reminiscing about. Some things have a way of resurfacing." Fiona stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lydia just smiled. "Nothing at all. Just that Michael always said the past has a funny way of walking through unlocked doors." For a second, no one spoke. Then Fiona laughed lightly, but the tension stayed. Later, as guests left, and the house fell quiet, I lingered by the fire. Lydia joined me again, holding a glass of wine. "You handled them well," she said. "I didn't handle anything," I replied. "I just stayed quiet." "Exactly," she said softly. "Sometimes silence makes more noise than shouting." Her eyes flicked toward the grand staircase, where Fiona's shadow moved past. "Be patient, Nora. They've buried more than kindness in this house." When she left, I sat alone in the flickering light, thinking of my father's words. "One day, they'll measure warmth by how close they sit to you." He'd been right. And sitting by that door last night, I finally realized how cold their hearts had become. I wasn't the ghost here anymore. They were. By evening, the house had transformed again, the dining room glowing under crystal lights, the fireplace burning low, and Fiona's voice echoing through every room as she directed the staff. Christmas Eve was her stage, and every guest was part of her performance. I'd spent the day avoiding her, slipping between errands and small talk, watching her command everyone with her quiet cruelty. By the time dinner began, my patience had hardened into something sharper. When I entered the dining room, the table gleamed even brighter than the night before. The silver reflected the candlelight, the crystals sparkled, and at the far end, my chair waited, the one by the door. "Ah, Nora," Fiona said as I approached. "We saved your seat again. You don't mind, do you? You always liked the breeze." A few polite chuckles followed. I smiled faintly and took my place without a word. The chair wobbled slightly, uneven from years of use. Evan grinned across the table. "Careful, Nora, that seat's got history." "Does it?" I asked. He nodded, his grin widening. "Mother's been sitting the quiet ones there for years. Tradition, you could say." "Tradition," Fiona echoed, pouring herself wine. "Every family has its customs." I said nothing, though I could feel every eye turn toward me. Fiona enjoyed that, making her cruelty look like ritual. Dinner began in waves of laughter and chatter. Fiona dominated the conversation, talking about her charitable gala, the estate's renovations, and the Delaney legacy. Evan and Mila nodded at every word like loyal courtiers. I sat quietly, watching the reflection of firelight in the window beside me. Halfway through the meal, Fiona raised her glass. "To family traditions," she said brightly, "and to everyone knowing their place within them." My throat tightened, but I smiled anyway. "To family," I said softly. Lydia, seated near the middle, didn't join the toast. Her eyes flicked toward me instead, her expression unreadable. The laughter returned, brittle and rehearsed. Fiona continued her performance, occasionally pausing to glance at me as if ensuring her message had landed. When dessert arrived, the housekeeper carried in a tray of plum pudding and set it before Fiona. "Thank you, Grace," Fiona said, all sweetness now. "You've outdone yourself." Grace nodded politely, then stepped aside. As she did, the front door creaked open slightly, the draft from outside cutting through the room. A few guests shivered. "Close that, Nora," Fiona said again, not even looking at me. I stood, fastened the latch, and turned back to find every face watching me, half amused, half embarrassed. I met Fiona's gaze and smiled, calm and steady. "Funny," I said. "It's always me by the door." Fiona blinked, surprised by my tone. "It's simply how the table was set," she said lightly. "You know how particular the spacing is." "Of course," I said, taking my seat. "Tradition." Lydia's lips curved into the faintest smile. As the guests drifted into smaller conversations, the doorbell rang again. Grace hurried to answer it, returning a moment later with someone I hadn't expected to see: Henry Cole. He looked slightly uncomfortable in his dark coat, snow still clinging to his shoulders. Fiona's expression faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Henry, I didn't think you'd join us." "I was in the area," he said, polite but firm. "I have documents you asked for." "On Christmas Eve?" Lydia murmured. Henry smiled faintly. "You said they were urgent." Fiona's eyes flicked toward me before she spoke again. "Always so diligent. Come in then." He stepped forward, handed her a thin folder, then nodded to me. "Nora." "Henry," I said quietly. "Old friends?" Mila asked, tone teasing. "We grew up together," Henry replied before I could. "I used to help her father in the greenhouse." The table went silent for a beat. Fiona's fork paused mid-air. "That place was torn down years ago," she said quickly. "Waste of space." Henry's voice was calm. "He built it himself, I remember." Lydia spoke softly. "Michael's greenhouse had warmth this house could never keep." The silence stretched. Fiona forced a smile. "Well, not everyone appreciates tradition." I met her eyes. "No," I said. "Some of us just sit too close to the door to feel it." Her hand tightened around her wineglass, the only sign of reaction. Henry shifted slightly. "Actually, Mrs. Delaney, these papers relate to the trust Michael left behind. There are a few discrepancies that need your attention." Fiona's composure cracked only for a moment, but long enough for me to see. "That's hardly dinner conversation." "Perhaps," Henry said, "but it's family business." Evan frowned. "The trust was settled years ago." Henry didn't look away from Fiona. "That's what I thought too, until I found some missing amendments. Michael made a few changes shortly before he passed." Fiona's voice cooled. "And why are you bringing this up now?" "Because," Henry said simply, "they concern Nora." The air in the room shifted. The candles flickered. The clock ticked too loudly. And for once, Fiona had nothing to say. Mila's brow furrowed. "Nora? What could she have to do with father's trust?" Henry looked at me, then back to Fiona. "He left a clause naming her as beneficiary to part of his estate under certain conditions. It seems those documents were never processed." Fiona stood abruptly, her voice sharp. "That's impossible." Lydia's calm voice cut through. "Or inconvenient." The silence that followed felt heavy, like the weight of snow pressing on the roof. Fiona recovered quickly, her smile tight. "We'll discuss this later. Not at my table." "Of course," Henry said politely. "But I'll need your signature soon." She nodded stiffly, signaling the end of the conversation, but I could feel her anger burning beneath the surface. When Henry left an hour later, he paused by the door. "Good night, Nora," he said softly. "Good night," I replied. As the door closed behind him, I could feel Fiona's eyes on me. She lifted her glass again, her voice smooth but brittle. "To family," she said. No one responded. After everyone drifted away to their rooms, I lingered alone in the dining room. The door creaked again in the cold wind, its handle gleaming in the dim light. I ran my hand over the brass, the memory of my father's greenhouse heavy in my chest. The same hands that had built life had also left behind truth buried somewhere between walls of gold and silence. They thought I was sitting at the door because I didn't belong, but I was beginning to understand something. That door wasn't meant to keep me out. It was meant to lead me in. That night, long after the house fell quiet, I couldn't sleep. The snow outside pressed against the windows, soft and relentless, muffling every sound. I lay in bed, replaying Henry's words, "They concern Nora." No one had ever spoken that way in this house before. No one had ever said my name and concerned in the same breath. At some point, I got up, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and slipped out into the hallway. The lights were dimmed, the air cold enough to see my breath. The house creaked faintly, an old beast settling into its bones. I found myself walking toward my father's study. Fiona had locked that room years ago, claiming it was too painful to keep open. But I knew where she hid the spare key behind the portrait of herself in the hallway. Some habits never change. The key was still there, taped neatly to the frame. I peeled it off, fitting it into the lock. The door clicked open with a low groan. The room smelled of dust and cedar, the scent of my childhood. My father's old leather chair faced the window, where moonlight spilled across the desk. Papers still lined the shelves, yellowed with time. On the far wall hung the same photograph he'd kept for years. The four of us, before everything fell apart. I was maybe 10, my father's hand resting gently on my shoulder. Fiona's smile then had looked real. I moved closer to the desk. The top drawer opened easily, full of pens, old receipts, and loose papers. But the bottom drawer stuck halfway. I pulled harder until it gave way with a shudder. Inside was a single envelope, thick, sealed, my name written across it in my father's handwriting. I froze. I hadn't seen his writing in years. My hands trembled as I broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The ink had faded slightly, but his voice came alive in every line. My dearest Nora, if you are reading this, then I've already gone, and the house has forgotten how to be kind. My breath caught. I know your mother will try to make you small. She does not understand gentleness. She mistakes it for weakness. But you must remember, strength can be quiet too. Sometimes it sits by the door and waits for the right moment to open it. I pressed the paper against my chest, tears threatening. I've left something for you, Nora. A key one that unlocks more than just this house. Fiona will find ways to hide the truth, but truth has a way of surviving her. Trust Henry Cole. He understands more than he lets on. I left instructions with him, though he may not even realize their purpose yet. When you're ready, use the key. It will lead you to what's yours and what must be set right. At the bottom of the page, taped neatly, was a small bronze key. I peeled it off carefully, turning it over in my palm. It was old, tarnished, and heavier than I expected. The key, my father's final secret. The fireplace in the corner still held a few ashes. I knelt beside it, letting the faint warmth brush my fingers. I could almost hear his voice. Again steady, kind. Behind me, a floorboard creaked. I turned sharply. Lydia stood in the doorway, her robe drawn tight around her shoulders. I thought I'd find you here, she said softly. I stood, quickly folding the letter. I couldn't sleep. She nodded, stepping inside. Neither could I. The air feels thick tonight, doesn't it? It does. Her eyes moved to the desk, to the open drawer, then to the letter in my hand. You found it. I didn't ask how she knew. He left this for me. Lydia's face softened. He trusted you more than anyone, Nora. He told me once that you were the only one who saw him without judgment. I swallowed hard. He mentioned you. She smiled faintly. We were friends, that's all. But he confided in me near the end. He knew Fiona's ambitions would consume everything. He said he hid something only you could uncover. I showed her the key. This? Her eyes widened slightly. Keep that safe. I think it unlocks something she never wanted you to find. I looked down at it, the weight of it settling into my palm. He said to trust Henry. Then you should, Lydia said. Your father didn't trust many people near the end, but he trusted him and you. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my pocket. Lydia, why did you stay friends with her? With my mother? She sighed. Because someone had to remember the woman she used to be. And because deep down, I think she knows she's wrong. She just doesn't know how to stop pretending. The clock in the hall struck midnight. Lydia turned to leave. You'll need courage soon, Nora. Truth doesn't come quietly in this house. When she was gone, I stood in the center of the study, the letter still burning in my hand. Outside, the snow kept falling, heavy and endless. I ran my thumb over my father's handwriting one last time, tracing the words, "Strength can be quiet too." I slipped the key into the pocket of my dress. He had left me more than inheritance. He had left me a weapon, one built of honesty, patience, and timing. I turned off the light and stepped back into the hallway. The portrait of Fiona glared down at me, her painted eyes sharp even in the dark. I stared back without fear. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me, not anger but certainty. They had sat me by the door to keep me small, to keep me quiet. But my father had built the lock, and now, finally, I had the key. The next morning, the house was already awake when I came downstairs. The smell of coffee and baked bread filled the air, but it didn't feel warm. It felt staged, too careful, too rehearsed. I could tell something was wrong the moment I saw Fiona. She stood in the parlor near the Christmas tree, her arms crossed tightly, her expression pinched. Evan and Mila hovered behind her like nervous shadows. The housekeeper, Grace, stood pale and still beside the fireplace. When Fiona turned toward me, her tone was clipped. "Good morning, Nora. I hope you slept well." I didn't answer. Her voice already told me this wasn't a greeting, it was a performance. Evan spoke next. Mother's missing something. Something important, Mila added, her voice thin and tense. Fiona exhaled dramatically. My diamond heirloom necklace. It was in the velvet box on my vanity last night. Now it's gone. Her eyes flicked to me just for a second, but it was enough. I felt the room tilt slightly, the air tightening. Are you asking me if I took it? Of course not, she said too quickly. We just need to make sure it's found. It must have been misplaced. Grace, the housekeeper, looked like she wanted to disappear. Mrs. Delaney? Fiona raised a hand. Grace, we'll speak later. You've been careless lately. Evan stepped closer, his voice low. You were near her room last night, weren't you, Nora? I went to the Grace study, I said. You all saw me. The study's next to Mother's suite, Mila murmured, pretending to look sympathetic. Fiona sighed heavily. Let's not accuse anyone. We're family. But it's strange timing, don't you think? It went missing the same night you decided to wander through the house. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I kept my tone calm. You locked Father's study after he died. Why would I have any reason to go there if not for him? Her jaw tightened. You shouldn't have gone in there. You shouldn't have hidden what was inside, I said quietly. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Evan let out a cold laugh. What's that supposed to mean? Ask your lawyer friend, I said. Fiona's eyes flicked to me sharply. Henry? Before she could say more, there was a knock on the door. Grace opened it hesitantly, and Henry Cole stepped in, brushing snow from his coat. Fiona's expression faltered. Mr. Cole, she said, her composure thinning. You do have a habit of arriving unannounced. I thought it best, he said simply. I have updates regarding Michael Delaney's trust. May I? She forced a smile. Of course, but we're in the middle of a family matter. I heard, Henry said, glancing around. The missing necklace. Evan folded his arms. You seem to know everything that happens here. I know enough, Henry said, then turned to me. Nora, could I speak to you privately for a moment? Fiona's voice sharpened. Anything you need to say can be said here. Henry met her eyes. I'm afraid it concerns you as well. The tension deepened. Fiona's grip on her glass tightened, her knuckles white. Go on then. Henry set a folder on the table. When I reviewed the trust, I found something unusual. Michael's final amendment signed and notarized was never filed with the court. It reassigns certain personal assets, under specific conditions. Conditions? Fiona repeated, her voice flat. Yes, Henry said. In the event that discrepancies were found in the handling of the estate, the designated beneficiary would change. Evan frowned. And who's the beneficiary? Henry looked at me. Nora. Fiona's hand froze midair. That's ridiculous. I have copies of his handwriting, his signature, and the witness mark, Henry continued. It's legitimate. The silence was so sharp it almost hummed. Mila's voice broke it first. You're saying Father changed his will? Henry nodded. He made one final update 6 months before his death. Fiona let out a bitter laugh. Convenient. He's not here to confirm it. He left confirmation, Henry said, sliding another document across the table. A letter, sealed and filed with my firm. I didn't reach for it. I just watched Fiona as she tried to hold herself together. The mask she'd worn for decades was cracking. Why didn't you bring this up sooner? She demanded. Henry's tone stayed even. Because it was buried in a file labeled closed. Someone at your office requested it be sealed permanently. Fiona didn't respond, but I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. Lydia entered quietly then, drawn by the raised voices. Is something wrong? She asked. Mother's lost her necklace, Mila said quickly. And apparently, Father's trust wasn't as final as she said it was. Lydia's eyes shifted to Fiona. Oh, Fiona. It seems the ghosts of Christmas past have excellent timing. Stay out of this, Lydia, Fiona snapped. Lydia smiled faintly. I'm just observing. I turned to Fiona. You were right about one thing, I said softly. Tradition runs deep in this family, especially the tradition of pretending. Her face went pale. You think I forged something? I think you took what wasn't yours, I said. Her hand trembled, and for the first time, I saw something like fear in her eyes. Henry closed the folder. We'll finish this tomorrow morning. The court will need to see these papers. Until then, I suggest no one leaves the house, Evan muttered under his breath. You can't be serious. Henry's tone stayed calm but firm. It's procedure. He turned to leave. Fiona called after him, her voice sharp again. "You'll regret this, Henry." He didn't look back. Not as much as some others will. When the door closed behind him, the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Fiona finally spoke, her voice low. "If that necklace isn't found by morning, I'll call the police." "Then you should check your desk drawer," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because that's where I saw you put it last night," I said evenly. "You hid it yourself, didn't you?" Mila gasped. Evan's jaw tightened. Fiona's lips parted, but no sound came out. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You framed your own daughter to distract from your lies. That's who you are." The color drained from her face. I turned toward the door, the same door where they'd made me sit. "You've spent years keeping me outside, Mother. But now you're the one locked in." I left her standing there, pale and speechless, as the fire behind her hissed softly in the quiet. The house was silent after that confrontation, the kind of silence that follows a storm but hides another one coming. Everyone retreated to their rooms. I could still hear muffled voices through the walls, Evan and Mila arguing, Fiona pacing the parlor, her heels sharp against the marble. I sat awake in my room, staring at the bronze key my father had left me. I turned it over in my hand again and again, trying to understand what it opened. It wasn't a door key. It looked older, more intricate, something from a desk or cabinet. The words from his letter echoed in my mind. "Trust Henry Cole. Use the key. It will lead you to what's yours and what must be set right." By midnight, I couldn't wait any longer. I wrapped a coat around my shoulders and made my way down the hall. The air was cold, the lights dimmed. The house seemed to breathe around me, every creak and sigh of the old wood whispering things it had held too long. The study door opened easily this time. Inside, the air was colder than before, the window rimmed with frost. I lit a small lamp on the desk, its soft glow spilling over the papers I had left undisturbed the night before. The bottom drawer I had opened already, but my eyes went to the cabinet behind the desk, the one my father used to lock every night. I had tried to open it as a child, always curious about what he kept inside, but it never budged. The lock looked like it could match the key I held now. My hands trembled slightly as I fitted it in. It turned smoothly, almost too easily, as if it had been waiting all this time. Inside were files, carefully wrapped in brown paper and tied with a thin cord. A small envelope lay on top, labeled simply, "For Nora." I sat down slowly and opened it. Inside was a short note, written in my father's steady hand. "If you've found this, then you've already seen what I feared most, that your mother would forget who she once was. These papers will explain everything. They are yours now. Handle them with truth, not anger." I unfolded the bundle. Legal documents, financial statements, correspondence between Fiona and the family lawyer. As I read, the truth began to form, slow, deliberate, undeniable. After my father's death, Fiona had redirected funds from his trust into a private account under her name. She had forged his signature on one of the amendments, then used her influence to keep it hidden. Evan and Mila had benefited, though they clearly didn't know the details. The house, the company, the Delaney Foundation, all built on stolen trust. I leaned back, staring at the papers. My heart wasn't racing. It was calm, too calm. Truth has a way of numbing you before it burns. I gathered the files, careful not to make noise, and tucked them into my coat. Then I saw another folder behind the stack, thinner, labeled Henry Cole. Inside were a few letters from my father to him, all personal, full of gratitude. In one, my father wrote, "If anything happens to me, make sure Nora knows the truth. I've hidden what matters where only honesty can find it." I smiled faintly. He'd chosen the right man. A floorboard creaked outside. I turned off the lamp and froze. Through the small crack under the door, I saw a shadow move, slow, cautious. Fiona. She lingered outside for a moment, her hand on the handle, then moved on. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hall. I exhaled. My father had been right. Truth never came quietly in this house. I slipped out a few minutes later, the papers pressed to my chest, and went straight to the back garden where the snow lay untouched. I needed air. The night sky was vast and silver, the stars faint through the clouds. Henry would know what to do with these documents. I'd call him in the morning. Behind me, the house loomed dark, every window reflecting a different memory, laughter that wasn't real, smiles that cost too much. For a moment, I thought of my father again, the way he used to stand here every Christmas Eve, hands in his coat pockets, watching the snow fall. One day, he'd said, this house will remember what kindness sounds like. I wondered if it finally might. When I turned to go back inside, I saw movement through the dining room window. Fiona, pacing again, talking to herself, clutching a drink. She stopped suddenly, staring at the door where I used to sit. Then she turned toward the study, her face pale and tense. I moved quickly, slipping back upstairs before she could see me. My heart was steady, my steps silent. In my room, I spread the papers on the bed, reading them again, line by line, making sure I hadn't imagined any of it. The truth was clear. The estate wasn't truly hers. Legally, it still belonged at least in part to me. My father had built a safeguard, and she'd spent years pretending it didn't exist. I folded the documents neatly, tucked them into an envelope, and sealed it with tape. Tomorrow, Henry would take it to the court. As I lay down, exhaustion washed over me. But it wasn't the tiredness of defeat. It was the heavy calm that comes when a long-hidden door finally opens. Outside, the wind howled softly, shaking the windows. The sound wasn't frightening anymore. It was almost like breathing the house, exhaling its secrets at last. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark, "You were right, Father. I found it." And for the first time in years, I slept soundly, not as the daughter sitting by the door, but as the woman who now held the key to everything that had been taken from her. What I didn't know was that by morning, the house would no longer be quiet. Someone else had seen me in the study that night, and my mother had plans of her own. The next morning dawned gray and silent. The snow had stopped, leaving a pale, frozen stillness over the estate. When I woke, my first thought was of the papers hidden beneath my coat. The truth sat heavy in my room, waiting to be spoken. I dressed quietly and went downstairs. The house was unusually calm, no clatter of dishes, no orders barked from my mother's sharp voice. Just the faint hum of the heater and the creak of old wood. As I entered the dining room, I stopped. The necklace, the one Fiona claimed had been stolen, was sitting neatly on the mantelpiece above the fire. Its diamonds caught the morning light, scattering tiny reflections across the wall. Mila stood nearby, pale and uncertain. When she saw me, her eyes darted toward the necklace, then away. "Mother found it," she said softly. "She said it must have been misplaced after all." "Misplaced," I repeated. "How convenient." Before she could reply, Fiona appeared from the adjoining room, dressed impeccably as always. "Good morning," she said smoothly. "It seems we had a misunderstanding yesterday. The necklace was right where I left it. I owe you an apology, Nora." Her voice didn't sound sorry. It sounded rehearsed. "That's not necessary," I said. "I knew you'd find it." Her smile tightened. "Good. Then we can move on." Evan entered next, half awake, holding a cup of coffee. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Fiona said quickly. "Everything's been resolved." But Lydia walked in behind him, her tone sharp with knowing. "Resolved? I'd call it a little miracle. Things have a way of showing up when truth comes knocking." Fiona's eyes narrowed. "You've overstayed your welcome, Lydia." Lydia smiled faintly. "You've said that every Christmas for 20 years, and yet I'm still here." I hid a smile. Before Fiona could reply, the sound of the front door opening broke the tension. Henry stepped inside, his coat dusted with snow. He carried a folder under his arm. "Good morning," he said, nodding to everyone. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," I said. "We were just discussing family traditions." Fiona stiffened. "You should have called first." "I thought it better to come in person," Henry said. "There are developments regarding the trust." Evan frowned. "Now?" Henry placed the folder on the table. "Yes, now." He opened it and pulled out several sheets of paper, the same ones I had found in the study. "I spent the night reviewing these," he said. "They're legitimate, all in Michael Delaney's handwriting, notarized, witnessed, sealed. These documents were deliberately withheld from the court after his passing." Fiona's hand tightened on the back of a chair. "That's absurd." Henry ignored her and continued. "They show clear evidence that the estate's assets were redirected without authorization. Funds from the Delaney Trust were moved into private accounts, and Nora's inheritance was removed from record. Michael anticipated this possibility. His final clause restores those rights to her." The silence that followed was thick, the kind that demanded oxygen but refused to breathe. Evan looked at our mother, eyes wide. "You took her share?" Fiona's voice was ice. "Watch your tone." She's telling the truth, Lydia said quietly. I saw the bank statements years ago. I didn't say anything then because I didn't know where they came from. I do now. Fiona turned on her, furious. You meddling? Stop, I said, my voice steady. She looked at me, surprised by the firmness. Excuse me? I walked toward the fireplace, picked up the diamond necklace, and turned it over in my hand. You said I stole this, I said. But it was you, Mother. You stole everything, not just this, not just money. You took kindness and turned it into control. You took loyalty and turned it into fear. Fiona's breath hitched, but I didn't stop. You thought you could keep everything polished and perfect by burying the truth. But you forgot that even gold tarnishes when you lie long enough. I crossed the room, set the necklace gently in front of her, and said, Here's your missing gift. Consider it returned. The air cracked open. Evan ran a hand through his hair. Mila looked down, tears gathering at the edges of her eyes. Henry spoke quietly. The court will verify everything within the week. Once they do, ownership of the estate and the trust will be transferred as your father intended. Fiona's voice wavered. You can't do this. This is my home. Henry's expression softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. It was your husband's first, and it was meant to be shared. Fiona's facade shattered then. She gripped the edge of the table, her voice rising. You don't understand. I built this family. I kept us together when he died. No, I said softly. You kept us trapped. She froze. Father built this home on warmth, I continued. You rebuilt it on appearances. You replaced love with pride, generosity with fear. You didn't hold us together, Mother. You hollowed us out. Mila started crying quietly. Evan said nothing, but his jaw clenched, his guilt finally visible. Lydia stepped forward, her voice calm. Fiona, it's over. The truth's out. You can let go now. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, regret, maybe. But pride smothered it before it could take form. She straightened her shoulders. I'll contest it. You can try, Henry said. But you'll lose. Fiona turned and left the room, her heels echoing through the hall. The door to her study slammed shut. The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the clock. Evan looked at me. I didn't know, Nora. I swear I didn't. I believe you, I said quietly. But you didn't want to know. That's just as bad. He looked down, shame clouding his face. Mila approached me slowly. What happens now? Now, I said, we start telling the truth. Henry gathered the documents and nodded toward me. You did exactly what your father hoped you would. I exhaled, a long, steady breath I'd been holding for years. The snow outside had started falling again, slow and soft. Through the window, I could see the faint reflection of the door where I'd sat that first night. The same door that had once been my seat of humiliation was now the entrance to freedom. I turned to Lydia, who was watching me with quiet pride. He told me to handle this with truth, not anger, I said. You did, she replied. You, his daughter. For the first time, I believed it. By late afternoon, the wind had started to rise again. The air outside turned sharp, snow blowing sideways across the windows like a warning. The storm was coming back stronger this time, and inside the house, another kind of storm was gathering. After Fiona disappeared into her study, no one spoke for nearly an hour. Evan lingered by the fireplace, nursing a drink he didn't want. Mila sat on the sofa, staring at the necklace on the table, as if its glittering stones might offer an answer. Lydia quietly poured tea for herself, her calm the only steady thing left in the room. Henry and I sat at the far end of the dining table, the documents spread between us. He spoke in low tones, explaining what would happen next, how the court would review everything, how the trust could be restored. But my mind kept wandering to the closed door down the hall, Fiona's study. I'd grown up hearing my father's voice from behind that door, soft laughter, the faint scratch of his pen. Now I could hear the same sound again, only different. The scrape of a drawer, the clink of glass, the creak of a chair as my mother paced. Henry touched my arm lightly. You don't have to face her tonight. I do, I said quietly. This isn't finished. He nodded, his eyes steady on mine. Then I'll be nearby. I rose, my heart steady but heavy, and walked toward the study. The wind outside howled louder now, rattling the window panes. I knocked once before opening the door. Fiona sat behind her desk, a half-empty glass of whiskey beside her. The fire in the corner had burned low, casting her face in shadow. She looked smaller somehow, her perfection slipping at the edges. "I hope you're satisfied," she said without looking up. "I'm not," I said, "but I'm done pretending." She laughed bitterly. "Pretending? Everything I did was for this family. For you." "No," I said. "You did it for control." Her eyes snapped up to mine. "Control? You think I wanted this? I was left with everything to protect. Your father didn't understand what it takes to keep a name like ours intact. He understood love," I said softly. "You never did." The words hit her like a slap. Her face twisted, not with anger, but something deeper pain she couldn't admit. "You sound just like him," she said. "Maybe that's the best thing about me." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind outside roared, snow beating against the glass. The fire hissed, collapsing into embers. She finally stood, her movements sharp. "You think this is justice, don't you? Taking what I built, turning it against me." "I'm not taking anything," I said. "I'm returning it." "You stole it first." She stepped closer. "You ungrateful child. Everything you have, the clothes you wear, the life you live, came from me. I had a life before this house," I said evenly. "A better one." Fiona's hand trembled as she set down her glass. "You're your father's daughter," she said again, her tone softer now, almost broken. "Too idealistic, too naive to understand the world." "I understand it perfectly," I said. "I just refuse to be like you." She looked at me for a long time, her face unreadable. "You think you've won," she whispered. "But truth doesn't fix what it breaks." "It doesn't need to," I said. "It just needs to stop the lies." Her expression hardened again, the brief vulnerability gone. "You'll regret this. When the storm clears, you'll realize what you've done." I turned toward the door. "I already do. I let you make me small for too long." Her voice rose, sharp and desperate. "You'll never understand me." I stopped at the threshold, the sound of the wind filling the space between us. "Maybe not," I said, "but I finally understand myself." I left her there, standing by the dying fire, her shadow trembling on the wall. When I returned to the main hall, Henry looked up from his papers. "How bad?" "She's not angry," I said. "She's afraid." Lydia, sitting near the window, spoke softly. "That's new for her." Evan approached then, uncertain. "Mother's losing control. I've never seen her like that." "She's been losing control for years," I said. "She just covered it with polish." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know what happens now." "Neither do I admitted. "But whatever it is, it'll be honest." A loud crash cut through the room, the sound of breaking glass. We all turned toward the study. Mila gasped. "Mother?" Henry moved first, followed by me. We reached the door to find Fiona standing by the window, the shattered glass at her feet, snow blowing into the room. The wind whipped her hair across her face, her expression wild. "I told you truth breaks things," she said, her voice trembling. Henry stepped forward carefully. "Fiona, step back. The glass is sharp." She didn't move. "You all think I'm the villain, but you don't know what it's like to lose everything and still have to smile." I took a slow breath. "Then stop smiling, Mother." Her eyes flicked to me, and for a second, I saw the woman she'd once been frightened, proud, lost. Then she sank into the chair behind her desk, her shoulders collapsing. "I never wanted it to end like this," she whispered. "I know," I said, "but it had to." Henry quietly closed the window shutters, shutting out the storm. The room warmed again, faintly. Fiona didn't look up. "What happens to me now?" "That's not my decision," I said. "But whatever it is, it'll be fair." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. Henry guided me gently out of the room. Behind us, the storm howled again, but softer now, like it was running out of rage. Back in the hall, Lydia stood by the fire, watching the snow swirl against the windows. "The blizzard outside," she murmured, "is nothing compared to the one that just passed through this house." She was right. The air inside was heavy with something new, not peace, not yet, but the quiet that follows truth. As the night deepened, I sat by the same door, where I'd been humiliated days before. The draft brushed my skin, cold, but clean. Once, they sat me here to remind me of my place. Now, I sat here by choice because it was mine again. And as the wind outside softened into a whisper, I realized something simple and undeniable. The storm had never been meant to destroy me. It had been meant to clear the way. The morning after the storm broke, cold and silent. The house stood still under a blanket of white, the snow piled high against the windowsills, muting every sound. Inside, the air carried a strange calm, the kind that settles after chaos but before consequences. I woke early, unable to shake the feeling that something was coming. The papers Henry had secured were locked away in his briefcase, safe for now. Fiona hadn't left her room all night. The servants whispered that they heard her crying, but I didn't believe it. My mother didn't cry. She planned. Downstairs, Lydia and Henry were already waiting in the sitting room. The fire burned low, its crackle the only sound. "She hasn't spoken to anyone since last night," Lydia said quietly. "Not even Grace." Henry looked at me. "The documents are being reviewed by the court today. I've already spoken with the registrar. Once confirmed, they'll reopen your father's will officially." I nodded slowly, the reality still settling in. "So, this is it." He gave a small nod. "It's justice, Nora. Not vengeance." "Sometimes they look the same," I said. He didn't argue. A sound from the hall made us both turn. Fiona appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a dark robe, her hair undone. For the first time in my life, she looked her age. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with red, but her voice when she spoke was still sharp. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she said. "I didn't do this to hurt you," I replied. "I did it because it was right." She laughed softly, bitterly. "Right. You sound just like your father. He believed in righteousness too. And look where it left him, buried under ideals while the world moved on." Lydia rose. "Fiona, this isn't about ideals. It's about what he left undone." Fiona ignored her, walking toward the fireplace. "You think this house will be better under Nora's control? You think she understands what it takes to maintain what we built?" I stood. "What you built was based on lies." She turned sharply. "And what are you building, Nora? Justice? Or revenge?" I didn't answer. Some truths didn't need words. Henry cleared his throat, keeping his voice professional. "The court has agreed to a preliminary hearing this afternoon. They'll review the documents and verify the amendment. Once that happens, the estate division will be reevaluated." Fiona's jaw clenched. "You mean stripped?" "It means corrected," he said evenly. She looked from him to me. "I won't let you take this house. It was never yours to keep," I said. Her eyes flicked to the window where the snow still pressed against the glass. "You think you've won," she murmured. "But there's no winning when a family turns on itself." I met her gaze. "You turned on us first." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no sound came. Instead, she turned and left the room, her robe sweeping the floor behind her. Lydia exhaled softly. "She's unraveling." "Maybe," I said, "but she's not done fighting." Henry gathered the papers and nodded toward the door. "Let's finish this. Once the court verifies the will, it's over." The courthouse sat on the edge of town. A modest building surrounded by bare trees and frozen sidewalks. The drive there was silent except for the hum of the heater. Fiona came separately in her own car, of course refusing to sit beside me. Inside, the hearing room was small, lined with shelves of old legal volumes and smelling faintly of dust and paper. A judge sat behind the desk, spectacles perched low on his nose. Henry presented the documents with quiet precision, each page placed in order, each signature verified. Fiona's lawyer, a nervous man who seemed more afraid of her than of the law, raised weak objections. None held. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was calm but firm. "These documents are authentic. The amendment to Mr. Delaney's will is valid. As such, the estate's assets are to be re-evaluated, with primary trusteeship passing to Nora Delaney as the rightful heir." Fiona's hand gripped the edge of the table. "You can't," the judge looked at her over his glasses. "Mrs. Delaney, this isn't a debate, it's law." Her mouth tightened. She didn't look at me as she gathered her papers, her lawyer trailing behind like a shadow. When we stepped outside, the snow had begun to fall again, lighter now, almost gentle. Henry handed me a copy of the ruling. "It's official," he said quietly. "It's yours." I looked down at the papers, the words blurring slightly. "Primary heir, Nora Delaney." It didn't feel like victory, it felt like release. Fiona walked past me toward her car, her steps sharp against the ice. "Enjoy your throne," she said without turning. "You'll find it colder than you think." I watched her drive away, the sound of the tires fading into the distance. Lydia joined me at the curb, her gloved hand resting lightly on my arm. You did it, she said. No, I murmured. He did. I just opened the door. Henry smiled faintly. Your father would be proud. I looked at the horizon, the same gray sky that had hovered over this family for years. For the first time, it didn't feel suffocating. Back at the estate, the air inside felt different. The cold lingered, but the weight of secrecy was gone. Evan and Mila were waiting in the sitting room when I entered. Evan stood. We heard, he said. Is it true? Yes, I said simply. It's all settled. Mila's eyes filled with tears. Mother's furious. I know. She said she's leaving, Evan added. She told the staff to start packing her things. I nodded. Let her go. He hesitated. What about us? I looked between them, two people raised under her shadow, never taught to stand alone. That depends, I said. Are you ready to stop pretending? Mila nodded through her tears. Evan said nothing, but he didn't look away. Lydia entered quietly behind me. You've got a lot to rebuild, she said. But at least you'll build it on truth this time. I glanced toward the grand door where I'd been made to sit. The snow outside glowed faintly under the pale light. Yes, I said. This time, the foundation will hold. The house was finally mine, but more than that, it was free. And for the first time in years, the name Delaney no longer felt like a curse. It felt like closure. That evening, the house felt like it was holding its breath. The snow outside had stopped falling, leaving a quiet blanket of white over the fields. The fireplaces burned low, their light flickering across walls that had heard too many lies. For the first time in years, Christmas at the Delaney estate wasn't about wealth or appearances. It was about survival, emotional, moral, familial. Evan and Mila stayed, though the silence between us spoke louder than any conversation could. Fiona's absence echoed through every hallway. Her footsteps, her clipped tone, her constant instructions gone. What remained was an uneasy, calm, fragile but real. Henry had stayed too at my request. I thought you might need someone who knows how to navigate quiet after chaos, he'd said. He was right. We sat together by the fire in the drawing room while Lydia prepared a modest dinner in the kitchen with Grace, who had returned after Fiona's departure. The house, once filled with noise and pretense, now sounded human again. As the clock neared 7, Lydia called us to the dining room. The table was smaller now, reset for just 6 me, Evan, Mila, Lydia, Henry, and Grace. No silver chargers, no crystal chandeliers blazing at full strength, no staged perfection. Just candlelight, simple dishes, and a single sprig of holly in a vase. When we sat down, no one quite knew how to begin. The ghosts of every previous Christmas seemed to hover over the table, waiting for someone to speak. Finally, Lydia broke the silence. Your father would have liked this, she said softly. It feels honest. I smiled faintly. He hated formality. Evan looked around, his tone hesitant. It's strange without her. Lydia nodded. Strange can be good. It means something's changing. Mila spoke next, her voice trembling. Do you think she'll come back? No, I said. And I don't think she should. Not until she's ready to stop pretending. Mila looked down at her plate, tears welling in her eyes. I used to think she was protecting us. I see now she was protecting herself. Evan's voice was rough. She made us believe we were better than everyone else, but it just made us worse. Lydia reached across the table, placing a hand over his. You can still choose differently. He nodded slowly, his gaze unfocused. I want to. I just don't know how to start. Henry poured a little wine into everyone's glass. Starting is the hard part, but it's also the most important. We ate quietly after that. The sound of forks against china, the only reminder that we were still together, still trying. The food was simple roasted chicken, bread, and vegetables. Grace had baked an apple pie, the smell filling the room with warmth that felt genuine, not staged. Halfway through dinner, Mila stood. I want to say something, she said, her hands shaking slightly. I've been awful. To both of you. Evan looked up, surprised. Mila's eyes met mine. I used to think agreeing with Mother was the only way to belong. I see now it just made me smaller. I'm sorry, Nora. Truly. Her words hung in the air, soft and trembling. I nodded. Thank you. That means more than you think. Evan cleared his throat. Me too, he said gruffly. I should have spoken up years ago. I saw what she was doing, but I told myself it wasn't my place. I was a coward. It's not cowardice to be raised afraid, I said quietly. It's survival, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Lydia smiled, her eyes glistening. Then it's settled. The Delaneys will rebuild. Maybe smaller, maybe humbler, but honest. Henry raised his glass. To honesty, he said. We all echoed it softly, to honesty. The sound of our glasses clinking was gentle, almost reverent. After dinner, we moved to the sitting room. The fire burned brighter now, and the storm outside had calmed completely. The sky was clear, the moon silver against the snow. Lydia began to hum softly, an old Christmas tune my father used to love. Without thinking, I joined in, my voice quiet but steady. Evan and Mila followed hesitantly, until the whole room filled with a melody that felt both broken and whole at once. When it ended, no one spoke. There was nothing left to say. I stood, walking toward the tall window near the door, the same one where I'd sat that first night, shivering beside the draft. I opened it slightly, letting in a breath of cold air. Henry joined me, standing quietly at my side. You did it, he said. I just stopped running, I replied. He looked at me with a kind of quiet admiration. That takes more strength than most people ever find. Outside, the snow glittered under the moonlight. In the distance, the lake was frozen, smooth and unbroken. I whispered, almost to myself, he'd be proud. Henry nodded. He would. Behind us, Lydia was laughing softly with Evan and Mila, showing them how to cut the pie evenly. Grace had poured coffee, the smell rich and comforting. For the first time, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. As midnight neared, I stood by the door once more. It no longer felt like a symbol of exile. It felt like a threshold, one I had finally crossed. I turned back to the others. Merry Christmas, I said quietly. They echoed it, not loud, not grand, but sincere. When the clock struck 12, I closed the door gently. The latch clicked softly, final but peaceful. That night, the house didn't hum with arrogance or fear. It hummed with something new, fragile, but real. It was the sound of a family learning how to begin again. And for the first time in my life, I realized Christmas didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be true. 2 days after Christmas, when the snow had begun to melt into soft drifts along the edges of the drive, Henry arrived at the estate again. The house was quiet, stripped of celebration. Lydia had left that morning, promising to return soon. Evan and Mila had gone for a walk through the woods, needing time away from the walls that held too many memories. I was in the study, the fire burning low, when I heard Henry's knock. He stepped inside, holding a thin, sealed envelope. This came to my office early this morning, he said, handing it to me. It was found in an old safety deposit box under your father's name. It's addressed to you. My breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable, deliberate, elegant, steady. My father's. I took it carefully, tracing the letters of my name with my thumb. Nora. Henry stayed silent, waiting. I broke the seal with slow, trembling fingers. The paper inside was aged but well kept, the ink still dark and bold. My dearest Nora, it began. If this letter reaches you, it means what I feared most has already happened, that truth and peace have been buried beneath pride and silence. I know your mother well. I know how she hides her fear behind control. But I also know you. You have your mother's strength and my heart, though I pray you never let her strength drown your kindness. I swallowed hard, blinking away the sting in my eyes. You will grow up believing that quiet means weakness, that humility is the same as defeat. But one day you'll learn what I already see, that your calm is not emptiness. It is power waiting for its moment. I felt Henry's presence beside me, solid and patient. If you've found this letter, then the time I feared has come, the time when you must face your mother's truth and decide what to do with it. She has always mistaken love for control. Forgive her if you can, but don't bend for her. You owe her compassion, not obedience. My hands trembled slightly as I read. His words felt alive, speaking directly into the room. I built this house for warmth, not pride. But pride crept in after I was gone, and I have no doubt she used it to lock the doors against you. I tried to prepare for that. The will, the amendments, the safeguards, they were not for revenge, they were for justice. You deserve what I left you, not because of blood, but because of heart. I pressed the page against my chest. tears slipping silently down my cheeks. If Henry is the one who gives you this, trust him. He carries the honesty I saw in him as a boy. He will help you see what I wanted this family to become. I glanced up at Henry then, and he met my gaze without speaking. When the weight of all this feels too heavy, go to the lake. Stand by the water where we used to feed the ducks and throw stones. You once asked me why the water never stops moving. I told you it remembers the wind. That's what love is, Nora motion. Even when it's invisible, it shapes everything. The words blurred as I tried to keep reading. Do not let this house make you small. Fill it with laughter again. Open its doors. Let it be what it was meant to be, a home, not a fortress. The final lines were written in a slower, shakier hand. I may not be there when you read this, but I will be watching from the spaces between silence and truth. When you speak honestly, I'll be there. When you forgive, I'll be there. And when you stand by that door, the one they sat you beside, I hope you open it wide and let the world in. I love you, my girl. Always. Dad. The room went still. The fire popped softly, the only sound between us. I folded the letter carefully, holding it for a moment before placing it back in the envelope. My throat ached with everything I couldn't say. Henry spoke quietly. He knew you'd find your way. I nodded slowly. He always believed I would. We stood in silence for a while, both looking at the flames. Then Henry said, "What will you do now?" I looked around the study at the shelves of old books, the desk where I'd found his papers, the window that faced the lake. "I'll do what he asked," I said. "I'll open the house again." Henry's brow furrowed slightly. "You mean, sell it?" "No," I said. "I mean open it. To people who need it, families, children, anyone who doesn't have a place to belong. This house has been a symbol of pride for too long. It's time it became something else." He smiled softly. "That sounds like him. It sounds like us," I said quietly. He nodded. "Then I'll help you." The sky was pale blue, the snow glinting under the afternoon. Sunday I walked to the window and looked out toward the lake, its frozen surface, shining faintly. Somewhere beneath that ice, I imagined the water still moving, still remembering. When I turned back, I said, "He was right about one thing, love doesn't stop moving, it just changes shape." Henry looked at me, his eyes warm. "And what shape does it take now?" I smiled faintly. "This one. Truth, peace, maybe even forgiveness." He nodded, understanding. As he left the room, I unfolded the letter again, tracing the words one last time. Then I placed it in the drawer where I'd first found his key, locking it inside. Not as a secret, but as a promise. The fire crackled softly behind me, and the air in the room shifted lighter now, as if the house itself had heard him and finally exhaled. Weeks passed before I heard from my mother again. After the court ruling, she vanished without a word, leaving behind nothing but her clothes, a few pieces of jewelry, and a lingering scent of her perfume in the halls. The estate grew quieter with each day of her absence. At first, I didn't know what to do with the silence she left behind. It wasn't peaceful, it was thick, waiting as though the house itself was listening for her footsteps, and finally realizing they were gone. Lydia stayed for a few days longer to help me manage the transition. She made lists, organized records, and spoke to the staff with a gentleness Fiona had never used. "You'll find your rhythm," she told me one morning as she packed her things. "But don't mistake silence for stillness. There's healing work in both." When she left, I stood in the doorway watching her car disappear down the long, snowy drive, feeling the weight of solitude settle over me again. For a while, I busied myself with the house, sorting through boxes in the attic, cleaning the study, restoring the greenhouse my father had loved. It helped, a little. The work grounded me, gave me purpose. But every so often, I'd catch myself expecting Fiona to call out from another room, to criticize or command or correct. The absence of her voice was almost louder than the sound of her presence had ever been. Then, one afternoon in February, Lydia called. "She's in the North Cottage," Lydia said. "The one your father bought years ago near the cliffs." My breath caught. "She's there alone?" "Yes. I went to check on her this morning. She's quiet. Not angry, not dramatic, just quiet." I closed my eyes. "Did she say anything?" Lydia hesitated. "She asked how you were. I didn't know what to say. She won't admit it, but she's reading your father's letters," Lydia continued. "I saw them stacked on the table, the same ones she swore she'd burned. That startled me. She kept them? Lydia's voice softened. Of course she did. Some people destroy things by keeping them. Others keep them because they can't destroy them. Fiona's somewhere in between. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Do you want me to tell her anything? Lydia asked finally. I thought about it, about all the words I'd said and the ones I'd held back. No, I said quietly. If she wants to talk, she'll find me. And so I waited. Days turned into weeks, the snow giving way to muddy spring paths. The house felt lighter now, the staff more relaxed. Evan and Mila visited often, both of them slowly unlearning the brittle habits Fiona had instilled in them. They helped me restore the greenhouse, paint the old rooms, and reorganize the trust into a community project, a scholarship fund for local families, the kind my father would have loved. But still, I thought of her. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if she ate enough, if she was lonely, if she ever stood by the cottage window and thought of what she'd lost. I wanted to be angry at her still, I should have been, but anger had melted into something quieter. Pity, maybe. Or grief for what could never be repaired. Then one morning, a letter arrived. The handwriting was hers. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Nora, it began. Lydia says you've rebuilt the greenhouse. I drove past the estate yesterday but didn't stop. It looks beautiful. The house feels different, lighter. You've changed it. I read on. I've read your father's letters again. I used to think they were naive, that his kindness would destroy him, but I see now that it was the only thing that ever kept us together. I wanted to protect our name. He wanted to protect our hearts. He was right. Tears blurred the ink. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know that I understand now what I took from you. Not the money, not the inheritance, the years, the small things, the safety you should have felt here. I can't return them. I can only say I see you now, even if it's too late to stand beside you. Her handwriting wavered at the end. Be who your father believed you to be. I wasn't capable of it, but you are. No closing, no signature, just silence again. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the drawer beside my father's, where the two could sit together at last, the truth and the regret side by side. Later that day, I called Lydia. She wrote to you, Lydia said before I even spoke. She did, I whispered. And? She finally saw what she did. Lydia sighed softly. That's something. Yes, I said. It is. I hung up and walked outside. The snow was almost gone now, the grass peeking through in patches. The greenhouse stood bright and whole again, sunlight glinting off the glass. Inside, rows of small plants had begun to sprout, tiny green leaves pushing through dark soil, stubborn and alive. I pressed my hand against the glass, feeling the faint warmth beneath my palm. You'd like this, wouldn't you, Dad? I whispered. The wind answered softly, stirring the branches nearby. I stayed there a long time, watching the sun move across the glass, thinking of Fiona alone in her cottage. Maybe one day she'd come back. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I was ready to meet her, not as the daughter she'd kept small, but as the woman I'd become. For now, her silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace, the kind that comes when the noise finally stops and all that's left is truth. I turned and walked back toward the house, the door open wide behind me, the light spilling through. This time, I didn't look back. By the time the next winter arrived, the Delaney estate no longer looked like the house I had grown up in. The walls had been repainted in softer colors, the chandeliers dimmed to a warm glow instead of the cold brilliance Fiona had preferred. The heavy drapes were gone, replaced with windows that flooded the rooms with morning light. The door, the same one I'd once been sat beside like a servant, stood open almost every day now. It no longer kept people out, it welcomed them in. I had spent the year transforming the house into something my father would have recognized, a place that gave more than it took. The estate now served as a winter refuge for families in need, a quiet shelter for those who had nowhere to go when the snow came. The scholarship fund had been launched through the trust, named after my father, the Michael Delaney Foundation for Renewal. Every day brought people through that door tired, cold, hopeful. Mothers with children, older couples who'd lost their homes, people looking for a place to rest. The rooms that had once echoed with pride and false laughter, now filled with the sounds of life again, footsteps, voices, music, even the occasional child's laughter. Henry helped me with the administrative work, his calm presence grounding me. He had become my anchor through the slow rebuilding. though neither of us called it that aloud. There was no need for grand declarations. His quiet companionship said enough. Lydia visited. Often, too. "It feels alive again," she said one morning as we stood in the entry hall, watching a group of volunteers hang garlands along the banister. "It's strange," I admitted. "The house feels bigger now, and yet somehow smaller, like it finally fits." She smiled knowingly. "Because it's yours now, not in the legal sense, in the soul sense." I looked toward the door, where sunlight spilled across the floorboards. "Do you think she'll ever walk through it again?" Lydia didn't have to ask who I meant. "Maybe," she said. "But even if she doesn't, you opened it for her. That's enough." That afternoon, as the first flakes of snow began to fall, a delivery truck arrived, boxes of supplies, food, and blankets for the winter families. I stood at the threshold, directing volunteers as they unloaded everything. The cold air brushed my face. Familiar, but no longer unwelcome. Henry came up beside me. "You still stand by the door," he said with a faint smile. I returned it. "It's where I belong. Just not for the same reason anymore." Inside, the fire crackled. The children we'd taken in were decorating a small tree in the corner of the parlor. Mila was with them, helping tie ribbons, her laughter light and unguarded. Evan was upstairs working on a renovation plan, turning the old ballroom into a community hall. The Delaneys, at long last, were building something worth keeping. When the volunteers left that evening, I stood alone in the entryway, watching the snow fall harder outside. The house was warm, alive. Every candle seemed to breathe. And then, through the snowfall, I saw a figure walking slowly up the drive. A woman, wrapped in a dark coat, her steps careful but steady. Fiona. My body went still, my breath caught between disbelief and something like relief. She paused at the gate, as if uncertain whether to continue. For a moment, she looked like any weary traveler, not the woman who had ruled this house like a throne. Finally, she started forward. When she reached the porch, she hesitated again, her hand hovering near the handle. I opened the door wider. "It's open," I said quietly. Her eyes met mine. They were tired, softer than I'd ever seen them. "You changed everything," she said. "I had to," I replied. "It couldn't stay frozen forever." She looked past me into the warm glow of the house, her gaze lingering on the garlands, the faint sound of children laughing from the parlor. "It doesn't even smell the same," she murmured. "No," I said. "It finally smells like home." She hesitated on the threshold. "Do you want me here?" The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I never imagined she'd ask it. I nodded slowly. "I want you warm. You don't have to stay long." For a second, something flickered in her eyes. Shame. Maybe. Then she stepped inside. The firelight caught her face, softening the edges that time and pride had hardened. She looked around quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. "It's beautiful," she said. "He'd be proud." I swallowed hard. "He'd want us both to be." She smiled faintly, a real one this time. Small and trembling. "I can't undo what I did." "I know," I said. "And I'm not asking you to." We stood there for a long moment, two women shaped by the same man but in such different ways. The silence between us didn't hurt anymore. It held something fragile: recognition, maybe even forgiveness. Henry appeared from the hallway, surprised but composed. "Mrs. Delaney," he greeted gently. "Just Fiona," she said quietly. "No titles anymore." He nodded. "Welcome back." She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I won't stay long," she said again. "Stay for dinner," I offered. "It's Christmas Eve." Her lips parted as if to refuse, but then she nodded. "All right." That night, she sat with us, not at the head of the table, but among us. She ate quietly, spoke little, listened often. When Evan told a story about our childhood, she smiled without correcting him. When Mila laughed too loudly, she didn't flinch. As the meal ended, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "You did what I couldn't," she whispered. "I just followed his letters," I said softly. She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Then maybe I should have read mine sooner." When she left later that night, I walked her to the door. Snow was falling again, soft and endless. She looked at the open threshold, then at me. "This door," she said quietly. "You made it a welcome instead of a warning." "I had good teachers," I said. "You taught me what happens when it closes." He taught me what happens when it opens." She smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. Then she turned and walked into the snow, her figure fading slowly into the white. I stood there for a long moment, the cold brushing my skin, the warmth at my back. Once, this door had been my exile. Now, it was my purpose. And as I closed it softly against the wind, I knew the house had finally learned to breathe again. The first winter of the new Delaney Foundation ended with sunlight breaking through weeks of snow. The house, once silent and cold, hummed softly with life footsteps in the halls, the echo of laughter, the steady rhythm of renewal. Every room had been transformed, not by wealth, but by warmth. The door that had once marked my humiliation now marked beginnings. It stood open every morning, a quiet symbol of everything this place had become. People no longer whispered about the Delaney estate. They came here to work, to volunteer, to rest. And every person who crossed that threshold left something of themselves behind. A story, a memory, a little bit of hope. One morning, as I walked through the main hall, I paused by that door. Its brass handle was worn now from constant use. A draft slipped through the edges, but I didn't mind. I'd stopped fighting the wind. It was just the house breathing. Henry found me there, a stack of papers in his hands. "You still stand here like you're waiting for someone," he said with a soft smile. "Maybe I am," I replied. "Maybe I always will." He handed me the papers, donation forms, event plans, and letters from families the foundation had helped. "It's working, Nora. Everything you've built here is making a difference." I looked down at the top letter, written in careful handwriting. A woman thanked us for helping her children find a home after losing theirs in the winter storm. She'd signed it simply, "For teaching us that some doors still open." I read the line twice, my throat tightening. Henry watched me for a moment. "You know," he said quietly. "I think your father would have written that himself." "Maybe he did," I said. "In a way," he smiled. "And your mother?" "She came back once," I said. "That was enough. I think she needed to see the house alive again before she could let it go." "Do you think she found peace?" I nodded slowly. "In her own way. Silence was always her language. Maybe she finally learned to use it gently." Outside, the snow began to fall again, light, drifting, peaceful. That afternoon, I visited the study, the same room where everything had begun. The fireplace burned low, the light golden against the bookshelves. My father's desk was still there, polished, but I'd left it mostly untouched. It didn't need to change. It had already served its purpose. I opened the bottom drawer, the one where I'd once found his letter, and the key, and placed a new envelope inside. It was my own letter, written in my handwriting. "To whoever finds this next," it began. "This house once held silence that hurt. Now it holds silence that heals. If you ever feel small, remember doors are meant to open, not confine. Step through. Keep it open for the next person. That's how you break the cycle." I sealed the envelope and placed the old bronze key on top of it. It wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to whoever needed it next. As I closed the drawer, a wave of calm moved through me, the kind that comes when something ends exactly as it should. That evening, the foundation held its first winter celebration. Families gathered in the great hall, the air full of soft music and the scent of pine. Children ran through the corridors, their laughter echoing against the walls that had once known only anger. Mila played the piano, her touch light and joyful. Evan poured cocoa for the children, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since we were young. Lydia sat near the fire, talking with guests, her eyes warm with pride. Henry stood beside me near the door, his arm brushing mine. "Do you ever think about that first Christmas?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Every day. It's the reason this one matters." He nodded, glancing around the room. "You know, you never told me what you really felt that night sitting by that door." I thought for a moment. "Small," I said honestly. "But now I understand that sometimes being small is what lets you see everything clearly." He smiled. "And now? Now I feel open." He didn't reply, but the look in his eyes said everything. At one point during the evening, a little girl approached me. She couldn't have been more than 7. She tugged gently at my sleeve and said, "Miss Nora, can I sit by the door?" Her question caught me off guard. "Why?" I asked. She smiled shyly. "Because it's pretty. And it's warm there." I knelt beside her, my voice soft. "It used to be very cold there. I said. But not anymore. Go ahead. She ran over and sat down near the threshold, watching the snow fall beyond the glass. Her small silhouette glowed in the firelight, and something deep inside me shifted a quiet recognition that the story had come full circle. When the guests finally left and the house grew still again, I stood in the empty hall, staring at the open door. The night outside was calm, the snow falling softly against the glow of the lanterns. I whispered, "We did it, Dad." In that moment, I could almost hear him, the faint sound of his laugh, the warmth of his voice. "Keep it open, Nora. Always." I smiled. "I will." Then I turned back into the house, closing the door just enough to keep out the wind but never fully shutting it, because some doors, once opened, should never close again. Later, as I sat in the study one last time before bed, the fire burning low, I opened my journal and wrote, "They once sat me by the door to forget me. Now, I keep it open so no one else ever feels unseen." I set the pen down, watching the ink dry slowly across the page. The sound of laughter still lingered faintly in the halls, mixing with the steady hum of the wind outside. For the first time in my life, the house didn't belong to a name. It belonged to everyone who needed it. And me, the girl they'd once sat by the door, I had finally found my place. Not outside, but standing right where it all began, welcoming the next soul home.